Welcome to The Verdict. I'm Kent Myers, flying solo today. Mick Cornett is not going to be with us today or for the next couple of weeks as he's off engaged in other matters. We are starting today the first of a two-part series on religion and the law. Today we're going to be talking about the controversy surrounding the erection of the Ten Commandment Monument at the state capitol. We're going to have a couple of guests on that know a good bit about that topic. They're certainly experts in this area, and I think you're going to enjoy what they have to say. Once we finish that topic today, next Sunday we will bring you a somewhat related show dealing with the Hobby Lobby controversy that is now pending in the United States Supreme Court. We'll return our same two guests to talk about the legal issues there, what's at stake, what's likely to drive the decision-making process of the U.S. Supreme Court, and when are we likely to know something about it. So I hope you're going to enjoy this two-part series we've put together for you. I know you'll enjoy our guests, and I want you to let us know what you think about it, and we'll perhaps continue it or do similar things in the future. So right now, just sit back, relax. We'll have some commercials come your way, and then we'll be back with The Verdict's own version of The Monuments Men. You're watching The Verdict.
I like the idea of improvisation and starting with not a preconceived idea. All of my work is about visual images taken from my memory. I'm Brenda Kingery. I am an artist and I'm a proud Chickasaw. One time I said, "Oh God, please don't let me die with my paintings in the closet." And what I would want them to be is everywhere. I would want them to be loved, to be used, to be respected. You work your whole life doing this. You just keep going as long as you can. And I have such a good background with a 106-year-old grandmother that I've always thought in my mind I would just paint till I'm 106. My Chickasaw heritage has become a primary part of my life. And the reason is, it's a place I call home.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofenation.com.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
Welcome back. Kent Myers is sitting in for Mick Cornett today. He will be back in 2 or 3 weeks, but he sends his regards. As I indicated in the opening segment, we're going to do a two-part series for the next 2 Sundays on religious issues or religion and the law, however one might choose to title it. And we're using our same 2 guests, thank goodness. They're willing to give us their time for doing these 2 shows. The first show today, we have designated these guys as our monuments men, to put them in the context of a movie that's coming out pretty soon. We're going to be talking about the Ten Commandment Monument that has been erected at the State Capitol building and the lawsuit that's pending about that. And I want to introduce now, to my left, Professor Rick Tepker from the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Rick did his undergraduate work at Claremont College, did his law work at Duke, where he graduated with honors. He was in private practice for a number of years and has, for the last 33 years or so, been on the faculty at the University of Oklahoma, teaching, among other things, constitutional law. Rick, glad to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Rick's been on one other time. To my right is a partner of mine, Harvey Ellis. Harvey did his undergraduate and law work at the University of Oklahoma, where he likewise graduated with honors. He's been in private practice with me for in excess of 30 years. His primary area of practice would involve constitutional law and appellate practice. He is the co-author of Appellate Practice in Oklahoma, along with Clyde Muchmore. He is very well known in the area of constitutional law and deep analysis of legal issues. And Harvey's agreed to come on today for his first visit. Glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, guys, we want to get started right off the bat talking about the Ten Commandments monument at the state capitol. Rick, can you give us a little background about that?
Well, this is one of many cases that have recurred throughout the country in both the federal and the state system. You have a political body, the state legislature, wanting to erect the Ten Commandments monument, and there's dispute as to why. For some, it's clearly an attempt to acknowledge God and acknowledge man's duty to God. For others, it is an attempt to, try to explain the history of law and how it came to be. And that factual dispute between whether it is a religious purpose or a teaching history purpose is at the core of the many cases over the years that have asked the question whether this violates the Establishment Clause.
So that could be a pivotal issue.
It is.
And by Establishment Clause, Harvey, let me ask you to read the first few words of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, if you will.
And the religion clauses, there's two of them, two religion clauses, and they're the very first part of the First Amendment. It's sometimes thought that free speech is, but that's not true. It's the religion clauses. And the first 18 words is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so there's two different clauses in that provision. One, that Congress will not make a law respecting an establishment of religion. That's considered the Establishment Clause. And the second clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, that's considered the Free Exercise Clause. And they have two different roles to play.
But that's restricting Congress, right?
It is, but
and Congress didn't have any hand in erecting this monument on our state capitol.
Good point. And for many years, the states were free to disregard religious neutrality. And actually, it wasn't until 1940 and 1947 that those two clauses were held by the United States Supreme Court to apply to the states through a doctrine called the Incorporation Doctrine. In 1940, the Free Exercise Clause was held to apply to the states, and in 1947, the Establishment Clause was held to apply to the states.
So while the words only include the term Congress, the court interpretations have applied it to the state legislatures as well.
Through the 14th Amendment, through the Due Process Clause.
Well, at the time that monument was going up, I remember some newspaper reports, that's about as deep as I got into it, about how this was going to be just like Texas. Why is that important?
Well, there was a case decided shortly before this issue concerning a monument donated by Cecil B. DeMille to celebrate his movie on the Ten Commandments to Texas, also to celebrate a civic organization. The Supreme Court upheld that monument, or permitted it to continue to exist, frankly on the basis that it had been there a long time, no one had objected to it, so they had a kind of, willingness to let the old issues lie. But the same day they decided the McCreary County case in Kentucky. And that case is arguably much closer to the Oklahoma case, because you had a contemporaneous challenge of a political effort to elevate the Ten Commandments and celebrate it, arguably in a celebration of history. And the Supreme Court looked at the reasons for putting the Ten Commandments in a courthouse and concluded they were essentially a violation of this principle of religious neutrality. They were an attempt to advance religion and religious doctrine to teach that human beings owe a duty to God, as the Ten Commandments state.
So Texas's monument was permitted?
It was permitted.
And the other one was not?
Right. Giving law professors a terrible time to explain that in law school.
What significance, if any, is the fact that at Texas there were a lot of other monuments of a similar ilk, or at least historical nature, in the same park or area as this Ten Commandments?
It's very significant. There were 21 different historical markers, and there were a total of 38 with the monuments. And the Supreme Court actually had a diagram in its opinion depicting where each one was and showing its relationship to the Ten Commandments monument to illustrate that was part of a complete secular presentation by the state of Texas for the Capitol grounds. And the plurality opinion, it wasn't a majority opinion, it was a plurality opinion, which means that they were unable to assemble 5 justices, a majority of the court, to agree on the ground upon which they were upholding it. But the plurality opinion held that the monuments ought to be considered several strands in the political and legal history of Texas, and therefore to have a secular purpose. And as Professor Tepker pointed out, it was part of a donation. It was actually donated by the Fraternal Order of the Eagles, which was a civic and social and political society. And the purpose of it was to certainly combat juvenile delinquency. It was all started by a Minnesota juvenile court judge as a brainchild of this judge who went to the Eagles for support. Actually, they didn't want to support it at first for the very reason that it would endorse religion, and they talked the Eagles into supporting it by coming to a compromise as to the wording that they thought would satisfy Protestants, Catholics, and Jewish religions.
Well, has the legislature done anything in the way of enacting statutes that relate to these issues?
Yes, they adopted what was called the Ten Commandments Law that was adopted in May of 2009. Coincidentally...
Now, that was before or after the creation of the monument?
Before.
Before, okay, go ahead.
The Oklahoma monument.
The Oklahoma.
The Oklahoma monument was installed in 2012, November 2012, I believe.
So what did our legislature do in 2009?
They adopted a law to allow, it really is, it's kind of questionable, but it says allow the Oklahoma Capital Preservation Commission to accept a gift of a monument, which happened to have been made by one of the legislators who sponsored the bill, and to install it on the Capitol grounds with other monuments. They didn't specify what other kinds of monuments. They didn't specify what secular purpose would be served by the other monuments. And in fact, no other monuments were installed. Only this one monument was installed. They recited purposes that were akin to those that were recited in the McCreary case by the county commissioners in that case to support their monument, which was struck down by the Supreme Court in the McCreary case, handed down the same day as the Van Orden case, which our legislature cited, the Van Orden case and not the McCreary case, in support of its legislation to install the monument.
We'll come back to that.
Well, let me clarify one point. You refer to the Van Orden case. That is the Texas case. And the McCreary County case is the Kentucky case. The Oklahoma legislature cites the case that's not a precedent because it's a plurality opinion and ignores the case that does have a 5-person majority and is regarded as a precedent. And that presents a real problem for them.
I can see why. Let's take a break, or we'll present a problem to our sponsors. You're watching The Verdict. We're visiting with Rick Tepker and Harvey Ellis about religious issues. We'll be right back.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back. Kent Myers here with The Verdict and our two guests, Professor Rick Tepker and Harvey Ellis, talking about religious issues and the proposed or the actual erection of the Ten Commandments monument at the state capitol. When we took a break, Harvey, we were talking about perhaps some litigation that may be going on in regard to the Oklahoma statue out at the state capitol. Can you tell us about that Prescott case?
There's two actions that have been filed. One late last year, Prescott versus Oklahoma Capitol Preservation Commission. That case does not invoke the First Amendment that we read that applies to the states through the 14th Amendment, as we've discussed. It invokes instead an Oklahoma constitutional provision, and exclusively invokes Oklahoma constitutional provision. It's not filed in federal court. It's filed in Oklahoma County District Court, and the provision that it invokes is Article 2, Section 5 of the Oklahoma Constitution. I'm not going to read the entire provision, but basically what that provision holds is that there can be no direct or indirect use of public property for the use, benefit, or support of any religious sect or any system of religion.
Now, is this a new constitutional provision?
It is not. It has been there since the Constitution was adopted in 1906. There is scholarly debate as to why that provision was adopted, and there is some suggestions that it was part of an anti-Catholicism movement that began back around 1875 with an attempt for the Blaine Amendment, which we don't need to go into now. But the scholars believe that this particular provision is one of the strictest in the country, because there's 37 states around the country that have similar provisions. And Oklahoma's particular provision is one of the strictest. I think that may be why it was invoked rather than First Amendment, as well as Professor Tepker noted when we were talking before, independent state and grounds, and you could talk about that.
Yeah,
Oklahoma courts interpret an Oklahoma law, and that's an independent, adequate basis for resolving the case. There's no appeal to the Supreme Court. So I would guess that Michael Salem, who's a very good attorney and brings this case, is hoping that this can be resolved on relatively narrow grounds without it being unsettled by the controversies on the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So this is a suit brought by the ACLU.
This one is.
The Prescott case is.
And there's another one by American Atheists that is invoking the First Amendment, and that brings, as a possibility for resolving this issue, a lot of the controversies surrounding federal constitutional doctrine, which includes the McCrary case, it includes the Texas Capitol case, and includes a score of other decisions that are very difficult to reconcile.
On the Prescott case in state court, how far has it progressed? Has it been tried yet, or is it on the verge, or can you tell?
No, there's an answer filed, and nothing else has really happened. It's only in its very beginning stages.
So it's not moving along very rapidly.
No.
The Prescott case was filed first, and then what we're calling the American Atheist case was filed thereafter.
This month.
And that's in federal court.
Yes.
Based upon the U.S. Constitution, whereas Prescott is based upon the Oklahoma Constitution.
Correct.
Has there been other requests for monuments since the Ten Commandments came up?
Yes.
What do you know about that?
Well, not all that much, except that there's a nice long list of individuals and groups that want to have all sorts of other monuments surrounding the Ten Commandments monuments for various reasons. One we'll get to is the Satanists. These are either organizations who want to direct attention to themselves, or they want to focus critical attention on the Ten Commandments monument. But they've got another big problem before they can win, and that is they have to try to argue that the property we're talking about, the grounds we're talking about, is somehow a public forum as to fixtures. That's probably not the case, because this has been left to the Capitol Preservation Society, and there is a Supreme Court case which says that if government picks and chooses which monuments shall be erected, it's government speech, and there's not a First Amendment right of access to those grounds. And that's true even if the property is otherwise accessible to temporary transient protests, as are the state capitol grounds. So I think they have a very weak claim to have a First Amendment right of access, to have their equal time, if you will.
My understanding from, once again, the newspaper, is that those additional requests have been put on hold until there's a decision in Prescott or the other case.
The Oklahoma Capitol Preservation Commission called a moratorium after receiving requests from, I believe it was the Satanists, a Hindu organization, an animal rights group, and there was one called the Satirical Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. So
Flying Spaghetti Monster?
Flying Spaghetti
That
Monster.
sounds satirical.
After that one, they threw their hands up and said, no more, we're going to call a moratorium, and we're not going to allow any monuments to be placed until the litigation over the Ten Commandments monument is resolved.
Okay, I want to change our topic now because we only have about a minute and a half left, and I want to get to a quote from former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in a case that the quote has now been pulled up on the screen. Rick, I'd ask you to read it, if you would.
Sure. At a time when we see around the world the violent consequences of the assumption of religious authority by government, Americans may count themselves fortunate. Our regard for constitutional boundaries has protected us from similar travails while allowing private religious exercise to flourish. Those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must therefore answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well for one that has served others so poorly? And that quotation, one of my favorite quotations in all of constitutional law, points out that the Founding Fathers were very concerned about religiously inspired civil war. As the Catholic theologian John Courtney Murray said, the First Amendment are articles of peace. It sometimes becomes a debate about spaghetti monsters, but there's something much more fundamental at stake, and that really is the peace of the country.
Harvey, how are these cases? 30 seconds, 15 seconds. How is the case going to come out, the ACLU case?
The ACLU case.
Prediction.
My prediction.
Look into my crystal ball and make a prediction.
That would be the Prescott case based on the Oklahoma constitutional provision, and I think that is going to be. I think that will be a successful case. The constitutional provision.
In what respect?
I believe that the Ten Commandments monument is in violation of that constitutional provision on its face.
Rick?
Oh, I'm terrible at predictions. I think the federal issues will be decided by Justice Kennedy, and I don't know what he'll decide.
Okay.
At the state level, I think logically, Harvey should be right. which doesn't give me any confidence that it will in fact be the case.
Just to put this in perspective for your viewers, let's pull up a picture of the proposed Satan statue, which I think you can tell from looking at it is a picture of, I guess, a Satan, or the Satan, with children standing there at the foot of the statue. That's what's been proposed to be erected. Who knows how that's going to come out?
I think they should avoid it just because it's creepy. I think that's a legitimate secular artistic consideration.
We are out of time. I want to thank our guests, Professor Rick Tepker and Harvey Ellis, for coming and talking to us today as our verdict monument men. We will be back next week with these same two guests to talk about the Hobby Lobby case and what issues are involved there. You're watching The Verdict.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
I really think people are so unaware of the number of kids waiting just in Oklahoma. And I think if more people knew that those children were out there waiting, I think that just by the way we live our lives and the people we talk to, that maybe we can help encourage adoption from Oklahoma.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back, and we're closing out this show on the issue of the Ten Commandments monument at the state capitol. Thanks to Professor Tepker and lawyer Harvey Ellis for joining us. We'll see you next week to talk about Hobby Lobby.